Latvia, a land of frost and blood, where early hunters chased reindeer in deadly winds and death devoured everything. Through centuries it endured the Crusades, burned castles, the massacres of Nazi and Soviet occupation, and mass deportations to Siberia. Blood and fragments of a history that refuses to be forgotten. And despite all the madness, Latvia stood firm, dreaming of freedom, crying out, and proving that the will of a small nation is stronger than empires. Welcome to this new video in our series on the history of European countries. As the great ice began to slowly recede and the grip of frost loosened on the land that would later be known as Latvia, it was not the end of an era, but the beginning of a story. From beneath the melting snow emerged a muddy, silent landscape, waiting for the first to dare tread upon it. Then came the first hunters, men who chased reindeer through the deadly winds, armed only with spears and hides, living on the edge of oblivion. This was not life, but a perpetual test of survival, lasting thousands of years, shaping humanity as nature shaped itself. Then came the Neolithic age, and with it a subtle but decisive transformation. This land was no longer merely a passage, but a homeland. The first Baltic people, known as the Balts, arrived and settled among the dense forests and dark rivers. They cultivated the land, hunted, built the first villages, and bound their destiny to it forever. Here the first roots of a people were born, a people who, no matter how many ages passed, would cling to their identity. To the north, the Baltic Sea moved silently, not just as a sea, but as a road, as destiny. Many Baltic tribes lived along its shores, among them those renowned for their sailing ships, from which the name of the modern Latvians is derived. The ships cut through the fog, carrying furs, honey, timber, but the most precious commodity to emerge from this land was something like a frozen sun: amber. Thus Latvia became an essential part of the northern reaches of the amber trade route. Latvian amber was highly sought after in the ancient world, especially by the Romans, who saw in it ornaments, magic and medicine. Roman armies never set foot in this land, but Rome knew it, longed for it through this northern gold. And silently, Latvia entered the first global trade network. Centuries passed. People settled more, engaging in agriculture and fishing, while new powers began to emerge. In the 10th century, a Slavic entity called Jersky emerged in the east, ruled by Orthodox princes and wielding increasing political and religious influence. The landscape was complex. Eastern Christianity here, Baltic paganism there, and a fragile balance between the old and new faiths. But this balance did not last. By the late 12th century, concern began to creep into Rome. The Baltic lands were still considered pagan by the Church, and this was unacceptable. The decision was made, not through dialogue, but by the sword. The Northern Crusades were launched, and German knights poured into this distant land, bearing both the cross and fire. At the heart of this storm, the Bishop of Riga emerged as a tireless driving force. For decades, he led a systematic conquest of the country, establishing an order of warrior monks known as the Livonian Brothers of the Sword. Stone fortresses were built on the hills, German rule was imposed, and a new era began, an era of order, trade, but also of domination. Over time, Latvian cities transformed into thriving trading centres, and in 1521 they joined the Hanseatic League, becoming part of a vast European trade network. At the same time, new intellectual winds blew. The ideas of Martin Luther found their way to Latvia, and people began converting from Catholicism to Protestantism, sometimes quietly, sometimes in conflict. But stability proved illusory. The Livonia War erupted, and Russian armies swept through the country before Latvia fell under the control of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth as part of the Duchy of Livonia. No sooner had the people settled into one rule than another arrived, following the Polish-Swedish War, ushering in a new era of foreign domination. When the Swedish Empire extended its influence, the people breathed a sigh of relief, albeit temporarily. The Swedes were more moderate rulers. They introduced reforms, spread education, and life seemed less harsh. But these peaceful days were extinguished at the dawn of the 18th century, when the Russians invaded the country following their victories in the Great Northern War. Devastation returned. Wars, famines, and plague ravaged villages and claimed lives indiscriminately. While the Latvian people suffered, the German minority retained immense power, controlling both land and government, leaving the native population in a subordinate position. In the 19th century, the ground began to shake beneath the feet of the old order. With the abolition of serfdom, the Latvian peasant was not only physically liberated, but his mind was also freed. In the villages and the burgeoning cities, new ideas began to simmer like embers beneath the ashes. All of Europe was boiling with nationalist sentiments, and Latvia was not immune to this intellectual upheaval. Amidst Russian political dominance and a Germanic elite controlling the economy and land, a new generation of Latvian intellectuals emerged. Poets, linguists, and thinkers decided that the Latvian language was not merely a peasant dialect, but the very soul of a nation. They began to revive it, to document it, to disseminate it, and to connect it to the history and myths of the people. This was a quiet act of resistance, but a dangerous one. For the first time, Latvians began to demand not just a livelihood, but a political voice and the right to self-determination. As the 20th century dawned, time accelerated dramatically. Factories, railways, newspapers, revolutionary ideas, everything was changing all at once. In this turmoil, hopes clashed with fears. In 1905, anger erupted. During the Russian Revolution, the voices of leftist activists and workers rose, and the streets filled with chants. But the response was bloody. In Riga, troops opened fire on demonstrators. More than 70 people were killed in moments, and the streets became a scene of terror. The bullets were not merely punishment, but a message. The regime would show no mercy. Anger intensified, especially against the German elite, who remained a symbol of privilege and dominance, and the unrest continued, like an open wound that refused to heal. Then came the ultimate catastrophe. World War I broke out, engulfing Europe in a vortex of blood. Thousands of Latvians found themselves forced to fight in the armies of an empire that did not represent them. They died in the trenches, on distant fronts, for thrones that were crumbling. And when Russia fell into the hands of the Bolsheviks, the old world order collapsed entirely. Amid this terrifying void, the impossible happened. In 1918, Latvia declared its independence. It was a bold declaration in a world in decline. But freedom wasn't granted. It was immediately tested. Soviet Russia invaded, and a brutal war erupted. Latvians fought valiantly alongside their allies, defending their newly born homeland. After years of blood, cold, and hunger, they prevailed, securing their fledgling state. But stability was fragile. In 1934, Karlis Ulmanis seized power, establishing an authoritarian regime. Although he promised order and strength, democracy was slowly stifled. Latvia was independent, but anxious, trapped between ruthless giants. Then came total darkness. In 1940 the Soviets returned. Their entry was not a simple occupation, but the beginning of a reign of systematic terror. Under Joseph Stalin, Latvia was forcibly subjugated. Thousands were arrested and forcibly deported to forced labour camps, the Gulag, where many disappeared forever. Families were torn apart, and the nights grew longer. While most Germans had left, 1941 brought the worst nightmare of the century. The Nazis invaded. Any resistance was ruthlessly crushed, villages were burned, and horrific massacres were perpetrated against Jews and others deemed undesirable. It wasn't an occupation, it was genocide. In 1944, the Soviets returned. This wasn't liberation, but a new chapter of suffering. The mass deportations continued. Thousands more were uprooted from their homes. Those once labelled enemies of the state were given neither trial nor a chance to defend themselves. Instead, they were deported on silent trains to Siberia, to a land of ice and oblivion, where the hope of return was fainter than the smoke rising from their breath in the deadly cold. There, entire lives ended without graves, without farewells, without names recorded in the annals. But the wheels of history never stopped turning. With the death of Joseph Stalin, the grip of madness loosened slightly. The cruelty didn't disappear, but it changed form. The Soviet Union entered a less bloody, more cold phase. Latvia became an important part of the Soviet industrial system. Factories, ports, railways, and a workforce harnessed to serve an empire that tolerated no dissent. The country experienced a massive influx of Russian immigrants, which altered the demographics and created a silent tension in the streets, schools, and workplaces. The Latvian language was losing ground to Russian, and identity was being pushed into the shadows. On the surface, Latvia was industrially prosperous, but deep down its people lived in a state of alienation within their own country, working hard and owning little. Yet one thing remained unbreakable: memory, because freedom, however long its absence, remains more alluring than any imposed stability. In the late 1980s, the silence began to crack. People took to the streets, not with weapons, but with songs, candles, and the old flags that had been forbidden to fly for decades. Along with its Baltic neighbours, Latvia joined the wave of peaceful protests that shook the foundations of the crumbling Soviet Union. The dream was dangerous, but it became a collective one. In 1991, the impossible happened. Latvia regained its independence. It was not merely a political event, but a moment of spiritual rebirth. The language returned, history was returned to the books without censorship, and the homeland was returned to its people after half a century of oppression. Later, Latvia chose its place in the new world. It joined NATO to guarantee its security and the European Union to solidify its economic and political future. This was not an escape from the past, but rather a safeguard against its recurrence. Today, Latvia stands as a peaceful and stable nation with a high standard of living and a leading position in human development indices. Its streets are quiet, its cities clean, and its society, despite its old wounds, looks forward. Its achievements are not accidental. They are the price of centuries of occupation, famine, deportation, and forced silence. And the question remains open, as history has always left it. What awaits Latvia in the future? A small country with a heavy memory, and a will that has repeatedly proven stronger than empires. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.